Whenever you're ready.
Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I've locked it onto you.
Cool. All right, so my presentation's on CSS transitions, how to design, define, and trigger CSS3 transitions. So CSS transition just gives you the ability to smoothly change values of a property over a set duration. And to create a transition, specify the property that you want to change within an element and the duration of the transition. So to begin a transition, what's called a trigger. So we'll go over how to design and then define a transition and then how to trigger it. Briefly, just to talk about browser support, I think we covered this in one of our previous presentations, but it's gotten a lot better for transitions and animations. You still need to be cautious on some of the versions of any of the WebKit-based browsers, so that'd be Chrome and Safari. And I think it's recommended to use that prefix for animations and gradients. Reading online that I think of those are slowly fading out, but in the meantime, it's good to include just so you make sure your animations work on all browsers. Your transitions work. So if it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. It just will show up instantly. You won't actually see the transition. To design the transition, you just want to locate the element and the property within that element that you want to change. To determine, the next step would be to determine the transition properties, and those are the property that you want to change, the duration, timing function, or the ease, and then the delay. So we'll go over really quickly using this graphic what these properties mean. So there you can see in a CSS document the element class, and within that you see the property transition for how to write out a transition, and it's a little bit easier. We'll go over the longhand method, but easy just to remember this one. At least in the examples I did, I'll be using the shorthand. So that value is the property, and this is just going to be the property that you want to change. The next value is the duration, and this is just how long the transition is going to take to occur. Ease, or this could be also referred to as the timing function, is the speed curve of the transition. And I didn't really understand what this meant until I started playing around with transitions, but this is basically how fast you want the transition to occur within the transition. Meaning, do you want it to begin slow and finish faster, or do you want it to ease in and then ease out so that you begin slow, pick up speed, and then when you exit? Or you can set it to linear, which would be the same speed throughout the entire transition. And then the delay, this is pretty self-explanatory. It's just how long you want to wait before executing the transition. So this is the longhand. Up top, you can see the shorthand. This would be how you would write out in version. So you see transition dash property, and then I put in the property a width. So that's going to be what's going to be transitioning. And then the duration's 5 seconds. And then transition timing function, or the ease, I put ease in, so that's going to begin slow and then pick up speed. And the delay is 2 seconds, and so it's going to wait 2 seconds before beginning. And this would be how you would write it in the shorthand. So to trigger a transition, and we're going to go over there's a lot of different ways you can trigger, but we're going to use the hover pseudo class, which I think we've talked about before. Talk about how to do a class change using JavaScript. So I will show you on my web. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Cool. So I think hopefully this will load. Okay. And so this, some pens I created. I got, okay, so this first one that I made, you can see the HTML here, just a basic. And then within the CSS, you can see the width is 100. And that's what this is right there. And I didn't put a transition on this, so you can see the difference, the transition with or without. So this is instant. Whenever I hover over the div, it will, and it happens instantly. There's no transition. So if I take this same code, I'll put it back over here so you can see that. If I take this same page, this time with the blue box, and I add a transition in here, you'll see the web transition, and then the hover 300 pixels, it's the same. But this time, we're going to focus on that. It's expanded to 300. So there you see, expand to 300 pixels for 2 seconds. That's transition. Now, if we wanted to, I only defined 2 of the elements, but we could put in here. So we could say ease in. Actually, is it ease in? Do you guys know ease dash in? And picks up. And then you can put a delay. Let's say we want a 3-second delay. Oops. Oh, that's not. Do you know if you're allowed to edit on the fly with this?
I don't know.
I don't think you can on Chrome.
Okay. Well, that's a bummer. But that would be how you. Maybe I should make another one and show that. So that's using the hover element, and it changes. You can see the transition. So this, you can apply a transition to transform, and you'll see here I used a JavaScript. So what I did was I applied, and I'll show you on this one just so you can see. Basically, what I did was, I applied a div around the div, gave it a class. I think the class name I gave it was trigger. Oops. Div. And then I assigned this div of, I think it was box. Look at that HTML while we go over the JavaScript. But trigger and box, you can see there. This around the outside is going to be that trigger div and that trigger div. And what we're going to do is we're going to have it train is going to be 500 pixels on the x-axis. So it's going to move 500 pixels to the JavaScript code does is it basically takes, we look here, I'm going to change the class to clicked. So here, and then on click, it's going to change this box element transform, 500 pixels to the right, transition for 2 seconds, it'll ease in. That sounds really confusing. Very good way to explain move to the right. You click it and it moves back. There's a lot of cool YouTube videos on this, but anyways, do you guys have any questions on that presentation other than me using SAS on that last example? Cool.
I think it was explained well.
Conditions, and I learned animations and transforms at the same time, which was pretty cool.
Right, that's what I was doing the transformations. I learned a lot of those too. It's kind of funny. But all right. So I'll go to mine. Oops. All right. So mine's about Ajax and also about JSON files. So first off, we're going to talk about what Ajax actually is. And it's usually used alongside with JavaScript. So basics of Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It uses an object called an XML HTTP request object, which we'll go to in a second, as well as pairing with JavaScript and the HTML DOM model in order to request data from certain areas and then display the data back to it. Nice thing about this is it does it in time. So you, for example, if you click a button and it loads a file, it'll all do it at the exact same time rather than having to reload the page, and it allows you to display data or change data on the fly. So basically what happens is Ajax is going to take 7 steps to actually run it. So an event occurs, such as clicking a button or on load, you can do something. And then you create the XML HTTP request object. And then it sends a request to a server or wherever the file is. The server processes it. It sends a response back. JavaScript reads that response and then does something with it. Like, for example, this one says page update, or it changes words on it, or even can load into an object or something that you can use later. Now, the actual object itself that's basically the main object you're going to use in Ajax. Every time you use Ajax, you have to do a XML HTTP request object. And what it does, each one of them is going to have a few different properties that it has that helps it run. One is on ready state change. Basically, it will set a function to do something when the states change, the ready state change, which I'll go to in a second, what actually the states are. Then you have the ready state itself. It's just, there's 5 states of what process Ajax request can be in. Then you have the response text or response XML based on what you're requesting, and returns it whether as it's either a string if it's text, or it's a XML data if it's an XML file. And then you have the status, which there's a long list of statuses, but the main ones most people know are 404, which means not found, or 200, which means okay and everything's good. And the status text returns the actual text of not found or okay. So just the actual physical text of the request. So now, one of the basics of that is, like I said, there's 5 states of it. Anytime you do, it'll run a function based on when every time the state will change. So it's going to go through 5 phases in order to actually run the program. It's going to have starts at 0, that hasn't been initialized yet, and then you connect to the server. You request the server gets the request, it processes it, and then it sends it back. And so the program's going to say right here, it's one thing it'll say on ready state change. It's a property of it. So it'll do a function every time it does this, but it doesn't actually do anything until it gets to the 4th state. So it's just going through that, and it calls that function 4 times essentially. And the way it actually sends the request to the server, once it does that, there's 2 functions you use. There's one called open and one called send. So these are the examples I have. Open has 3 parameters. This one right here is either going to be, it's called get or post. generally means you're just retrieving a file, retrieving an already set piece of data like a text file or a JSON file. Or in post is where you're actually sending information to something to be processed and then get something back. Majority of the times you're going to use get, like a huge majority. That's what I was reading. Here you have the actual URL or the location of the file itself. And here you're going to have something called, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous. We're learning about this in our web development class right now. Basically, it means whether this happens instantly, which is synchronous, like it'll go like top to bottom, working its way down, or if it happens, it's called asynchronous, which is pretty much everything on the screen happens at one time, which that's what most Ajax does because it does it instantly, and then it'll send the request off to the server. So example of how this work, I'll show this to you this will be just through a basic text file. So my text file just says hello world, very typical programming thing. And what it'll do, I have I'll show you here. So I'm just going to change this text using the text button. So in this, you have to have it's called a div that has this text right here. It's going to be changed what the words are right here. So it has a button that when it clicks, it runs the load doc function. Now here it says it has the new XML HTTP request right here. It's called XHTTP. And this is if it couldn't do it, it sends a error and returns false. So just a safety precaution. But then you have the onReady state change function. Like I said, it's going to run it 4 times. So when it's the 4th state, which means when it's received the information back, and the status of it is 200, which means everything's okay, then it's going to get the element by ID, which is in the DOM method. ID is demo. And it's going to change the inner HTML to this response text, which you get this response text by opening using the get method. That's where I have my text file. And so it'll send that request, and it'll send that text back into this, which I believe is just going to say hello world. So when you click it, you notice the page doesn't have to reload. It just changes to hello world, but the other stuff's still the same. That's one huge advantage of Ajax. So now getting on to the next part. The next part is if you want to request something called a JSON file. JSON file is a JavaScript object notation file that has a series of variables and values that go in them. Now, in order to use something like this, when you read it in, you're going to have to use a function called parse. What that's going to do, it's going to read it into an object. So I have this one called temp, and it's going to insert variables to make it an object. So that's a variable first name, the value Jane, variable last name, value Doe. So when you read it into temp, when you change the value, you can change it to first name, put a space, and last name. You can call out specific functions from that using the same. That's the main difference between JSON. You have to read it into an object, and then you can call out what you want it to read. And this is where you would use the response text in the JSON parse. So that way, when you load it into it, since it has first name, last name, you click it, it changes to Jane and Doe. So it's able to read the variables through and read the values out. So that's basically all I had for the presentation.
So when you have this .response text, where are you naming the response text? It could be because I can't really read the screen very well.
Or they can spell it. The response text, I was saying earlier, I'll make it bigger if it helps. The response text is a property of XML HTTP request. And the response text is either text or XML based on what you're doing, and it'll return the string or the data. So it's already property of it. So when you do, I'll make this bigger and make it a little easier to see. But right here, for example, the onReady state change is already in there. The ready state, the status, the response text, those are all properties of XHTTP.
Okay.
And when it calls it this, it's calling that because it's it's basically doing it inside its own property, and it's setting the function to this. So what this is referring to XHTTP. The response text is what you're going to receive once this request goes, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the response text is basically what you receive from the GET.
Yes.
Okay.
The GET is going to get this file, which in this case would be this words. It would set up the first name and last name,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll go to response text. And what's going to happen, you're going to parse through it. And so it says temp, it sets the first name variable to Jane. It sets the whatever. If there's a list of longer variables, I had more I could have put in there. I just was doing that just for simplicity's sake. But you can put whatever variables you want in there and their values, and then you can call it out. So the response text is what you get from after you send it, you get the stuff back. That's the response text.
Okay, so it's, if I'm using the right wording, it's a property of the XML HTTP request.
Correct.
Okay.
That's just like all the other ones are. It's already built into there. It's just once it gets it back, it fills in the value of the text file or the JSON file or.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions?
And will you just, as well as posting the video, can you attach your PowerPoint to the discussion board as well?
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that.
That'd be helpful. This is just I've got all my topics done except for this one. I'm just having a little bit of a hard time, but you explained it really well, so I think I can get started on it.
Right, and the only thing I was trying to figure out how to get like your own local area. I'm just trying to think of how when they turn this in, how are we going to get them to read a file? I'm probably just going to have to go online and find a URL to a text file or something and use that as an example. I couldn't really get it to work with my local. This right here is a local server I have set up for my other web development class, but I don't know how to do it like on my own computer. I'll probably just have to like I said, go online and find a text file then.
What I did is I just attached, like, I don't know how you're setting up your codes. I'm doing mine in brackets, but I just have a separate folder that is in my basically huge website that I'm uploading to my GitHub. So when I use the JSON file, which I got just with the local storage, I just attached that file, uploaded it to my GitHub, and then it was able to reference it through that.
Got it.
Or Tyler, you're using a Bitmanny or whatever?
Yeah, that's what I'm using.
Yeah, just upload it there.
See, I did that. I have localhost. I didn't know if that would work on.
No, like if you upload it like to your whatever it's called, your Heroku.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure. I see that.
And then just send him the link.
Yeah, I can do
That's
that.
what I did.
That's what I was thinking of doing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that was the easiest because then you just give them, it's like, hey, here's my file.
right, that seems okay. That was my train of thought, and someone else has it too that works. Okay, that's reassuring.
The only hard part that I always have issues with, which I know is like super basic, but I just haven't figured out, is always the path. It's always that like, okay, am I doing a .. slash or is it slash or everything like that? So that always gets confusing to me, but I find it somehow, there's some miracle every time.
Yeah, if you're not used to it, it can be a big pain. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know about the / like to go back in a directory.
Mm-hmm.
It always like, I'm like, how do I go back and then forward? Yeah.
Yeah, I usually just keep trying till it works. Just like try several methods. I never know which one to start with. I'm just like, let's just start by just the file and then the slash and then the .. slash.
You
just
know
keep
what
going.
that is, right? Like basically you want to tell it where your directory is. So basically